Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who is carefully weighing his options to determine whether he experiences prosperity or experiences a slow and meaningless death.
Yeah, Tim Longo.
Yep. It's as someone said, it's a real Sophie's choice. What are you going to do there? It's funny because, and we'll get to this. Yeah, this was a Dwarf Fortress Part 2. This is a choice we both faced, and there, I guess, is a third option because, I guess it's likely for a slow and meaningless death in your case, but you did not engage well with the trade caravan, so. Because you didn't have a trade depot. You didn't know you needed one, and then you had to hurry up and try to build it.
There's that. Hurry up and try to build it, but also, I needed an architect, apparently. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, okay, how am I going to get... And I did find that eventually, but, I just didn't... And I think I actually had all the materials, so... But then it stalled out for some reason, because I think I didn't have the architect. And so it just was sitting there. I thought it was building, but it wasn't building, and they were just tapping their toe, waiting, or something.
Yeah, it's really weird. And that's one thing about the symbol language of this game that can be really tricky. I noticed this, especially with the trade depot, is that's the only one so far that has felt like it changes between you when you put it down and when it's built. And it builds over time. It starts as it changes the symbols a little bit of the glyphs of that area of ground that you put it on, but then there's a final form that it takes, with, you can see some pillars in the corners and it looks like a different building. It's like the equivalent of watching something built in SimCity or something, where it starts as just you see the construction stuff going on, but it's so much more abstract, right? So it's very, very difficult to tell that's going on. And since it's the first building that you might see do that, you might think that it's done, except that the merchants aren't doing anything with it. So
yeah, you have to constantly check on its status, or maybe did you finish yours fully? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Because you did start trading. Yeah. So it must give you a message then when it's done, or no?
It does actually at the bottom, I think, say the trade depot is open, move some goods into it or something like that. I think it does tell you what to do.
Because I feel like the workshops have a state change too when you put them down. Is that not true? I feel like
they do. But they don't change after you've put them down, I don't think. I think you put them down and you might see a dwarf go into it, but I don't know that I've noticed that the building itself changes.
Yeah.
I think it builds kind of instantly, right? Whereas the trade depot feels like it, because it needs an architect, maybe that it takes time.
It might have been my imagination. Yeah, I thought the jewelry craft or something had a state when you put it down, and then
that might be so. Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, but it's, that's the crux of this is the iconography challenges of such a complex game, and it is very much like you're learning a new language, right? Yeah, it's you're like, oh, that's what that means, and you're constantly trying to dig into using the look around. Is the look around? Is that what it's called? The look around key to I'm constantly using that just to kind of remember what symbols mean,
right,
and where boundaries are and all that kind of stuff. But
yeah, one thing that can be a lot is just you see your one of your dwarves walking, and then he's flashing. There's a red arrow down underneath him, and you're like, what does that mean? And I presume it means he's becoming more unhappy. Which I saw a lot of in my first village eventually. But go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No. Well, I was just going to say, there's other states that I got toward the end of the bad times, when the bad times were going, where I think one of them had a blue box all the way around, and I think it was melancholy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then when you actually go into the name description, when you go dig into the details of the dwarf, then their name also has a blue highlight over it.
Interesting.
And then the word melancholy was there as their status, and that was blue. So
wow.
and There's so many funny stories. I'll just finish the story because I know we want to go into macro topics, but the detail with the melancholy thing, and just to reinforce sort of the iconography changes, the reason I saw this dwarf, and this is like, I think my fortress is basically like, it's just a wasteland at this point, and this is like one of the two dwarves left. She was wading into this pool of water, murky like swamp water, and I had never seen anybody go into the water before. And I think she was like depressed or something, or the melancholy. And then that's when I saw the blue outline. I was like, oh no, what's going on? Why is she going into the water? Like, nobody goes into the water. And I think she was just like,
what's her name? Virginia Woolf.
Done. Yeah, exactly. It was like, oof, that's harsh. Like, she's so sad, and like she's one of two people left, and
oh, jeez.
I'm just like, holy crap, that is dark.
Yeah.
Dark.
Oh man. Oh,
and then I turned it off. I just couldn't cope.
Couldn't watch anymore. Yeah, yeah. I can see that. Yeah. Who knows how long she stood there on the shore, wondering if she should take a step in or a step back out.
Yeah.
Yeah. They do sort of vacillate around their states, I think, a little bit, and that, that's a typical simulation, boundary problem of like, how much do you let them go back and forth? And because I definitely saw when tempers were flaring, I saw a lot of like, he's angry, he's outraged or he's enraged or whatever. And, and then he's like, he's calmed down, but then it would cycle back through that again fairly soon thereafter, which is again, I think one of the things we talked about last time I mentioned is I have a very poor sense of how fast time is passing. Yeah. So it's like hard for me to understand whether those states are taking place over days, minutes, hours. Like, what is the time scale of those emotional states? Like, does it seem realistic, right? Because I don't have a sense of time. It feels fast to me, but like, I don't know if that's because time is passing like hours in a minute, or hours in, 10 seconds or something. Like, I have no concept of how quickly that time is passing. There's probably somewhere where it's represented and I just haven't found it yet. So, yeah. Anyway, this is quite a game.
Seeing seasons go by is the only thing that I really
exactly
have.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, it's autumn. Holy what?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So three of our fortresses ended badly. I had two. Because after I had one going south, I started another one. I was like, well, I have a much better sense now of what I should be focusing on early, and making sure I plan for it a little bit better. Like, so my second one felt like it was going way, way better than my first. I think we'll come back around to some of the macro topics, but my second one, I was like, this is gonna be good. And I was carving along. It was pretty symmetrical. Like, it felt pretty grand. It felt like a dwarven fortress to me. I was like, this is how it's meant to be done. And I had started building either a big meeting hall or maybe someplace which was going to be either a gathering place or, not really a throne room, but maybe some sort of town hall kind of area, some sort of meeting room in the, deep into the mountain. And I was slowly expanding that. I was making sure it was supported with pillars. And while I was outside doing other stuff and watching other dwarves do things, maybe even dealing with a trade caravan, they kind of went tick, 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 tink, and cut through a wall, and just water poured in from an underground river and flooded my second dwarven fortress, killing one of the dwarves. You could see them running out and trying to run away, blocking off the place. Actually collapsed. The waters eventually receded. That I had to redig into that room, which turned out to be a bad idea later on. I should have just left it. I should have built in different directions, but no, I was like, well, maybe I can figure out, because I know you can build a floodgate. Maybe it has something to do with that. So I'm like, maybe I can do something with this. And unfortunately, first, a dwarf was killed outright when that large room collapsed, when the water knocked all the supports out, because the supports fell, and then the walls slammed down in front of it, like a couple of blocks blocked off, so that no further passage of water was happening, although a lot of flooding had already occurred. that left a cat stranded behind, which I watched slowly drown because
Oh my god!
it was just there and it had nowhere to go, and it just eventually drowned. And then later on, I sent the remaining miner. I had 2 really good miners, and they were doing really well. They had done a great job for me. They had the best rooms, and they were ecstatic all the time. Well, at least until this happened. And one of them went in there, and later on, it's like you hear shaking. I'm like, what is that about? And by the time I figured out it was probably time to get that dwarf out of there, a second cave-in occurred, killing him as well outright. And so that was the point at which I said, okay, I guess this one's not meant to be either. But it was still fun, honestly. Like it was an amusing, like, okay, all right, I see how this can go. Like, could just be that there's a river there, what I'm worried about is like how much of that is likely. Like, there's a degree to which I'm not going to understand this simulation. I'm never going to understand the how the world is generated. Like, I don't care to understand it that well. But if it's very likely there's always going to be a river pretty close by where you start, that would be unfortunate. Like, that would be frustrating. So
yeah, you'd have to like plan for it by digging slowly and then putting floodgates every time or something.
Yeah, exactly.
There's something like which is sort of like maybe how miners actually have to mine in real life, and we just don't know it. It's like they have to account for the unexpected because you don't know. Well, I guess in the olden days, maybe now we have technology that can help you see what's beyond. But
yes, if only the corporations wanted to spend money on that.
Yeah, the dwarven corporations.
Did some politics seep in there, as it were?
Yeah. Well, I just like listening to you. Like in pre-show, we were talking about like how do you even tackle talking about this game and what how do you kind of group topics, etc. But as you're describing as you're telling the story, if you will, of what was happening to that game, it's a similar theme to both. To be honest, to Plundered Hearts and Plundered Hearts and Rogue, because I mean, as you would probably say, just like a good book, it's like you put so much of your own interpretation and description in your mind about what's happening, and you impose your own detail, if you will, right? And your own sort of sub-stories about what actually is happening. And it just is so effective with such a simple visual implementation of that. With both Rogue, it's like the story of when you met your first griffin, I think was the one that comes to mind, right? Where you're like, you can see that scene in your head where you're like, what is that G? I'm going to go see what that G is. And you get closer and closer and you're like, oh no, that's a griffin.
I'm going to get further and further. Oh no, I'm not.
Yeah. So it's but it's just icons on a black screen. It's just amazing. And then this game is like on a whole nother level. Yeah. Because so many stories come out of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
It's funny thus far. I mean, because I think this is just cognitive load is that I don't actually have any attachment to individual dwarves yet, even though there are very few. And I think that's just
I have a story about that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you've already told me about, the one I renamed Virginia Woolf, but for me, I think that right now there are so many things that I'm learning and thinking about in terms of planning what I'm going to do. Like, I'm already thinking for the next one, like, okay, maybe the rooms are a little too big. I mean, they were pretty spacious. Like, I don't have anything to put in them really, so maybe I could be slightly more efficient in that, which frees up more time to do X, Y, or Z. Right. So I'm like I never have the time to think about individual dwarves. The other thing is because their names are all generated, it's just hard for them to stick, right? And it's like a lore thing with me, right? It's like, well, if it was Bill, I'd be like, oh yeah, Bill was the miner, right? That would be easy for me to remember.
Or go the XCOM route, right? And let you name them.
Yeah, let you name them or have it be named after people in your mailbook, your email contacts list or whatever. So that makes it just harder for me to grab onto them as individuals. And then it kind of makes me, because I can't do that, I can't remember, like, I knew that my miners were ecstatic, but I couldn't have told you anything else about them. It's just like, oh, I've got happy miners, right? But I didn't, I couldn't remember. I think one was male and one was female, maybe that was the first game. Like, I can't, so there's a certain amount of, like, because I'm doing so much with the rest of the game, those sort of individual details, which are nonetheless present, I just can't grab onto yet. Like, but I could see there being a day where it's like, oh, we killed our first, whatever, mountain lion or something. We managed to kill a mountain lion, because I know sometimes there's mountain lions, or cougars maybe. And if I could remember, like, oh, I think I saw that somebody liked mountain lion pelts, like that, I would make them a mountain lion rug or something, to put in their room, and that might thrill them. Like, I can imagine getting to that point with the amount of detail that's here. But at this point, it's very hard for me, despite the fact these are the fewest number of dwarves I'll probably ever have, right? I mean, it's single digits in most of the time. I can't grab onto any of that stuff yet, because I'm so worried about so many other things. So it's an interesting tension.
Yeah. And given time, I think probably, right? Like, it's kind of like XCOM in that the longer you have a unit you've named alive, the more attachment you have to them, right? Yeah, so if you make it, people, you expand the group, and then eventually down the road, you're like, oh, that's that dwarf that was here from the beginning, even though I have a bunch of new dwarves, that kind of thing. But
right,
yeah, no, it's an interesting point. I mean, the brilliance of it, though, is that you can totally see, like, in this first version / whatever earliest version, though there's plenty of criticism on what could be better and what what as a player you want more of, you can see the potential and the trajectory of where it could go. And then, because we have the luxury in this weird academic podcast where we play games from the past and look at their impact and relevance today, it's like we know where this story goes. We know where this game development story ends with the Steam version, so you kind of, it's like it's in a weird way, because this game's been in development for so long. We're time traveling, right? We get to see where their success leads them, because they stuck with it. Yeah. And it's a really fascinating, and it's a great suggestion from Artemis for playing it.
In that way, it sort of reminds me of a different sort of game. I can't remember the name of this, but there was a game that was like, it was in development for like 17 years, but it wasn't.
Battlecruiser 3000. No,
no. This was I want to say this was a Eastern European developer.
Yeah, it's kind of vaguely ringing. I think I know where you're going. I can't think of it, though.
Yeah, I just can't remember the name of this game. I would have to go spend some research, and I didn't expect this topic to come up. But if I have a chance to look it up. But I remember thinking, like, it was a great story, but it was unlikely they were going to have. I mean, they got some reporting, which was which is hard enough to come by, and that probably helped. But it was the sort of thing where it's like, yeah, but if they had either been doing it out in public a little bit more, like, I'm just hearing about this at the end, and there's this very big, complicated, complex game, and I thought about that. I was like, yeah, I'm probably not going to play that, just because it's probably super rich and interesting and all of that, but I've got so much else to play, that there was no story except, like, it came out. It's been in development forever, by some independents or amateurs, maybe, because I don't think they were being paid to make it, but it it finally was everything they wanted it to be, and it took 20 years or whatever, and it's a very different sort of story from we released an alpha when we felt comfortable doing so, and then we just kept working on it for whatever 18 years, it's or 16 years, so it's an interesting counterpoint, to think of, like, I mean, I can't even remember the name of the other thing, right? So kind of tells you everything you need to know. So
and there's probably multiple stories like that too, that others that we're not even aware of, or we've forgotten about. So from one question I had that before, I want to tell a couple of stories myself, but one question I had for you that I forgot to ask in pre-show is, from a coding perspective, how much do you know about, because we know that Tarn is the only programmer, and they're both designing. And I'm blanking actually on his brother's name. Zach, right. So he's using glyphs, as you are calling them, as the visual, the visual element. But is he just doing it in C++, or like how?
I would imagine so. Like I assume that it's just in C,
just
or
hand,
C variant, and just hand coded. Yeah.
Okay, so it's just basically discrete code for everything that he's doing. Is just
that would be my expectation. I mean, I'll actually look it up, but I assume it's C. Let's just go ahead and look that up.
Well, because like the reason I'm asking is like, even for the
C and C++, yes,
the help menus, right? The help menus and interfaces, like he's coded scroll bars,
right.
and like, and there's no mouse GUI or anything, so it's like, I don't know. It's sort of, you probably didn't use this word processor, but my first word processor was called PFS.
Chang's? No, that's
that's PF Chang's. No, I think it was PFS something, and it was a DOS based word processor that you'd print out on a dot matrix printer, etc. back in the day, and it's just using the basics of DOS, right, to do its thing. And it's just, this game feels like a DOS, like a MS DOS game at this point, even with the help files. And it's just sort of like of an era. And to think that the Steam version just came out, so previous to this, like a year ago or 2 years ago, whatever the last version was, people were still happily playing this old DOS, DOS feeling game, but it's still with modern design aesthetics, if you will. So it's just a fascinating case study.
It definitely reminds me of terminal-based games, that you would run on a mainframe, like Rogue, for that matter, right? I mean, it's sort of similar for me and to things like that. And it also, I do know that they later go to a low-level library called SDL. I've seen that because that's one of their releases. Like, it's called, okay, now we're SDL. It's like, I think it's mentioned in like the italics underneath the release, like SDL and Windows. Like, there's two versions. There's one that's still native, and there's one where they're using this, I guess mildly hardware accelerated, probably is probably why they're doing it. It's called Simple Direct Layer, I believe, is SDL. I've used it myself. It's just kind of a helpful, like, it's sort of like using any sort of simple engine that just like helps you set up Windows and things, so that you don't have to code all that stuff yourself every time. But it has graphic stuff, it has input stuff, it has a number of different sorts of things. And so I know at some point they moved to that. And that's why I said it's probably C, because SDL is written in C and has written C and C++, mostly C++, I guess. So if they're using both, they're really using C++ because they're compiling it with a C++ compiler. So it's effectively C++, even if they only use the C subset of the language. So that's needless detail and very nerdy.
I was like, you migrated into another language there for a bit, and I was like, Yep. On my side, I'm just smiling and nodding. Magic.
They write in magic. What are some of your stories? You're you're sad, melancholy person, so we know where things end up.
That was like in the film or TV show where it's like you start with that scene and then it's like 3 months earlier.
Yeah, right.
It's like
earlier that year.
Earlier that year. See this poor woman just like losing her mind. So a couple things. Like, I have a long list here, but one of the things I want to talk about cats some more, because I think I talked about cats last session a little bit, but that one cat that was I think feral, but maybe somebody tamed it at some point. And so, like I said, running around, eating food stores, sleeping on people's beds, seemingly. This is, again, the cool thing about this game for me is all the stories I'm making up in my head that may or may not actually be true in the simulation. It's like, I think that it's sleeping on someone's bed because that's what cats do. But I don't know if it's just randomly going into that space or if that's part of the AI or what. But I just love that I'm filling in, like I said earlier, like a good book, you're filling in the blanks, right? You're like, this is what I think is happening in the sort of my head canon. So anyway, this cat's roaming around. I'm not sure how exactly. Maybe there was a second cat that I didn't see, but the cat eventually had a kitten.
Yeah.
And the kitten, which probably is the default state, this is, again, my own assumptions. The kitten is born hostile, I think.
We are born screaming, Tim.
Yeah. So, and I think anything that's hostile is a red version of the letter. And so I have this kitten running around who is red, and it is harassing everybody. Like, basically, what I think was happening, I kind of went back and I tried to sort of like deconstruct through the message, the alerts or the announcements rather, what was happening, because people were going about their business, but they all kept getting interrupted by combat. And I was like, what is attacking? There's nobody attacking. And then I see this one little red C just running around. And I think the kitten was like, just for like one or two turns, interrupting somebody sleeping or interrupting somebody mining or whatever. I just get these texts, these chains of text of all these people being interrupted. So it's like my whole civilization got ground, was grinding to a halt because this kitten was born. And, so that was the first step. I don't know if this is if this is what led to the massacre or not, but I have to think it might have been a contributing factor. So remember also, as a segue / partner to this mini story, remember last time I was talking about the jeweler?
Yes.
And I was like, okay, the jeweler's really sad because I'm just not getting to the jewelry craft phase quickly enough. So I built a jewelry workshop earlier than probably you should because I was trying to make them happy. And so I did that, blah, 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 blah. Didn't find jewels. I think I found some silver. I did eventually find jewels, but I didn't store them or harvest them quickly enough. And so long story short, the jeweler, I think, became the murderer because they got so it's like the whole story of this particular Dwarf Fortress was really like, I can see the movie where it's really like the jeweler is the main character and you just see this slow descent of sadness. And then eventually the jeweler, I guess, did something called berserking, and they went into berserk mode and then just started murdering. I think that's the best I could tell. They started basically, freaking out and like taking people out. And so I was like, what's happening? I go to my, I'm off doing something outside. I go inside and I see this dwarf going from dwarf to dwarf, and they're fighting. And then you see there's blood everywhere, which is like astounding to me, like walls of blood and blood on the floor. And then you see the remnants of somebody who has died. And then eventually, so then we had a jaguar attack outside as well as a wombat invasion because I'm in the jungle. And this was all happening at the same time. Then like a family of chimpanzees raided into so this was like all happening at the same time. And so I guess do dwarves go in?
This is some Werner Herzog stuff, man.
It was just,
you're in the Amazon, clearly.
Yeah, exactly. It felt very much like that. It felt like we were in the, so at one point things were going, like I'm describing, it's just so crazy. I just sat there and watched. Like I just wanted to see I wasn't even reacting because I didn't know what to do really. Like it was too late basically.
Yeah, right.
Because it kind of like all this stuff converged. But then the dwarves that were still alive, I guess, do they kind of automatically go into axe dwarf mode when they go into battle? Because some of my farmers became axe dwarves or axe wielders or some kind, and they went out and killed the jaguar. One of them died in the process, but The other one survived. And a bunch of wombats died. And then also like their body parts are separated and strewn about. So like when animals die, I guess, or maybe somebody ripped them apart. It's just astounding to me that there's like, I was like, what is that little two over there? Oh my God, that is the leg of a wombat.
Amazing.
And then what's that over there? Oh, that's the bottom torso of a wombat. I was like, what is happening with this game? So then I was like, cool, we killed a jaguar, which I assume is the equivalent of your mountain lion. So then I go back into into the Dwarf Fortress, and the jeweler is like in one corner of one of the rooms that was not their room, just like in my mind, like panting and heaving and just like shuddering in the corner. And this other dwarf, to your earlier point about like how they sort of algorithmically like simulate sort of a fake AI of somebody like go like trying to make a decision on what to do, you know what I mean? Like having somebody go between states, back and forth between states. So this other dwarf was like going into the room, and then like in my head, they were seeing the berserking dwarf in the corner, like freaking out, and then they would leave the room.
Yeah.
And then they would go back in, and then they'd leave the room.
Yeah.
So they go back and forth like. So in my head,
it's probably
like
their bedroom, and they were going in and then finding it was filled with blood.
Exactly.
And the blood drove them off, right? And they were like,
exactly.
So in a way, it is working. It's working as in your mind, right? I mean, I think simulation wise, there's like an attraction to my bed. I'm tired, like, and I wonder if there's a point at which it tips over. Is like, you know what? I'm so tired. I don't care if my sheets are drenched in blood. Right? How far am I willing to go? Right? It's like as those numbers climb up, you can get really interesting behavior from that, and it definitely. I can just imagine that dwarf walking in. It's like, are they really calm over there? Am I going to be okay?
Well, it's like and I think it in my head it was like a fear AI reaction, right? It's like they were fearful, like you said. They have a desire to go into their room. And you're right. I didn't think of that, but it probably was their room. Yeah. And obviously their red arrow is going down and like
every time they go in and see blood and
and the wall in his room, the wall is just completely red and bloody. Ugh. And then there's this like murderer in the corner, like in my head, like facing the corner, like in Blair Witch Project or something.
Yeah.
Just like ready, and then also another dwarf that person, the jeweler, had killed was like on the floor next to them, so like there was also a dead body in there. And so this poor person was trying to go to sleep, I think. Yeah. And then the cherry on top of all of this is the merchant caravan was waiting outside during
You all right in there? You need a little help? They're hitting the bell on the counter. Ding, ding, ding. Trade Depot's not open yet. Oh, man.
While they're hearing screams like, what's happening? So it was just a confluence of just so many. Again, I don't know how much of this is actually happening or is me making this up, but my interpretation of the decline of this dwarf, this dwarf settlement was just so entertaining. Yeah. In a weird way. And I think my interpretation isn't far off. It's just crazy to me that, and then again, like the final thing I did was I noticed that person was melancholy. Pretty much everyone was dead except for her and one other person. Trade caravan left. They're like, forget you. We're out of here. And they kind of slowly go off as they travel through all the carcasses of all the animals that we killed. Wow. And then this poor woman walks into the water, just like it's.
That's pretty dark amazing stuff. That is pretty dark stuff. Yeah, I had actually had in that first one. I think that whole run went like 5 hours maybe total. Like some last week.
Oh wow, that's impressive.
And I'd had the person come with the anvil, so I had 8 dwarves. Then I had the trade caravan come, and unfortunately, so I was talking with the traders and trying to figure out what to do, and I was like trying to figure out like what would be valuable because I have no sense of what anything is worth or anything like that. So I offered some dryolite blocks, and they weigh like 250 whatever that symbol is supposed to be. And the merchants have like, I don't know, 200, let's just say pounds of stuff themselves. And somehow in the interface, I basically made that an offering, like, here, just have this. And they're like, okay, we'll take it. And then I was broken because they have a limit on how much weight they can actually take. And now I had pushed them over their weight. So I couldn't trade anything with them, even if it were a zero sum, because they were overweight. So they couldn't take any stuff. So I was at the point where they have all this food. Like they have food and they have leathers of different kinds. And I'm like, oh, I want all that stuff. I want to like get us some leather pants and jackets or whatever to get us through the winter. And I can't trade anything with these traders. I had built the trade depot. I got that up in time. Like I saw them coming when they appeared on the map. I was like, oh, I got to figure out what I need to do about that. And so I got that going really fast. I had already figured out the architect thing because I needed it for some other room, maybe for the wells. I think you need them for wells. So
I made a well, but I mean, it may have been low priority for that person because of other things they were doing. Right. So that's the indirect thing. So yeah, I usually kind of like go and find somebody and like, okay, you're my architect. What are you also you're doing? Okay, you're not doing those things anymore. I need you to do this, right? Yeah.
And then put them back to that afterwards. Anyway, so the trade caravan comes, the trade caravan goes, and I haven't bought any food. And I'm like, this is not looking good. Because my food stores, maybe there'll be enough. And then I think in like mid to late winter, 8 more dwarves came. So my space just, I have suddenly all these additional mouths to feed, and they were not as good dwarves, honestly. I mean, like there were like 4 that were peasants or something,
freeloaders.
Right? Yeah, so they basically came for the like, oh, these people are rich, let's go join that settlement, And I had 8 new dwarves to feed, and I had no way to do it. I hadn't figured out how to do farming. And farm plots, you need basically muddy ground.
Yeah, I never figured it out.
Yeah, well, when I flooded my second settlement, I flooded that room, and it was like, oh, actually, you can plant there now. I was like, well, maybe this is now I have indoor farms.
Funny.
And then those farms got washed away in the second, or they got crushed. Anyway, so back to so these dwarves came, and then basically we started going through the food really fast, and there was no booze because I hadn't figured out how to brew anything yet or distill anything yet. And so we're just going through tons of food. And some of the dwarves who were there to begin with, in my original 7, started getting really ticked about this whole scenario. And then, one of them just started getting angrier and angrier. And then he started killing people. And pretty soon I was down to 8 again, and then I was down to 6. And I'm like, well, I see where this is going. And it was like, I've seen ant farms before, as they wind down, I'm good, like I don't need to see it again. So I could see like the trend was, and one of the things I do find I want is like, I don't want to save scum. I don't want to micromanage every save state, but I would like a point of like, okay, let me go back to that. And, let me think about where I went after the trade caravan came. Like, is there some, or just to redo that interaction would have been nice, because as soon as I did it, I was like, oh, I've blown it. Like I knew that slow and meaningless death was probably what was ahead of me, because I think that trade caravan, like those feel like scripted first year things.
Yeah.
That are going to happen, right? They need you to get the anvil. They need you to set up trade, because that I think is an engine for like encountering and difficulty stuff like we talked about last time, is my guess still, because I haven't gotten to the point where that matters. But it's like that's kind of a guiding. We're basically still in the preface, right? I mean, we're still in chapter 1, and we're getting to the end, and it's to choose your own adventure, and we chose death, or death was thrust upon us in unfortunate ways. But yeah, it has made me long for like, okay, especially learning the game, and in that first year, where it feels like. But on the other hand, their approach is like, well, losing's okay too. Like losing's fun.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah, it feels roguelike in that way. Or there's also times in Civ, right, where you're like, I just don't think I'm going to win this. I'm not going much further. And it's more user friendly in that approach. So you don't feel as bad, maybe.
Yeah.
But in this case, yeah, it does feel more unforgiving because it's still so opaque to me, at least. So you're like, yeah, this doesn't feel like it's going to go much further, but I'm not sure what I, did wrong exactly. In your case, you have a good theory, but yeah, happiness is a thing. I just think like it's so like the one of my other mistakes I think might have at least contributing to happiness. I think was as simple as I didn't build chairs. Like I feel like every dwarf was like sad that there weren't chairs.
Yeah.
And it's like such a simple thing, but such a funny thing for them to code into the desires, which I guess it makes sense to some degree because if you think about it, nobody wants to just sit on the ground for their whole life,
Yeah.
So,
words to live by. There's a natural leader right there, folks.
Yeah, that creates a colony of murderers.
Yeah, no, my approach so far has been to start. I do a couple things as early as I can. I get the miners going and start carving out rooms inside that I can make into. I try to put a couple wells near the front door, in little rooms, and one of them I'll usually turn into a meeting room. So there are a few chairs and a table. So I've to do all of this. I have a carpenter and I have a mason, somebody who's turning stone into blocks. Right. And I keep carving stuff out and I start, I've made some, piles, whatever they're stockpiles, I guess, okay, put all the wood near the carpenter and put all the, stone near the mason and kind of get all of that going. And then,
that's smart.
Yeah. And so that they don't have far to go to get their materials. And then I start putting storage for finished goods and I put those inside. So it's the carpenter will finish a thing and then he'll go bring it inside and put it in a room. And then some other dwarf will come put it wherever I assign it. And I try to get everybody a bedroom pretty quick and doors. I make a few beds and a few doors. And
how do you make walls? If you carve too much and then you want a wall to make a door, can you remake walls? You know what I'm saying?
I feel like walls are
if you've carved too much.
I'm very careful not to do that. So
yeah.
I don't think I've done that yet. So
maybe you can't. Maybe you just have to do supports or something.
I would think you'd be able to. Well, yeah, maybe you could do.
I couldn't find it. I couldn't find a way to do it. But anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. I mean, so that's been kind of my strategy. In fact, it was going super well. I had some kennels. I had dogs that had puppies, and I had turned some of them into hunting dogs, so it's I was prepared to go out hunting.
Don't have a kitten though.
No, I tell you, I was planning to go out and maybe hunt down these raccoons who are always marauding into my space, because that happened a second time in the second village. So I'm I actually got a similar location the second time as well. So I was just I was feeling okay, I really have a strategy that feels like it's working pretty well. I really messed up that trade thing. That was a really big fulcrum point, because I hadn't worked out my food issues. I had not worked out how to farm. Yeah. I hadn't figured out how to do that, and so even though I had some farmers come in that second batch of people, I had nothing for them to do as far as farming went, so it's well, I can't, I literally made a farm that was pretty big, as big as it can be. You can expand a farm plot to 8x8 or something like that. I didn't really want to build one that big. I just wanted to make it easier to search the map to find, a place where any green squares would appear that I could put a farm plot. And I couldn't find anything. And I'm oh no, we're going to starve. There was a point at which, I think that guy who got angry first was out I would see he interrupts what he's doing to hunt vermin. And I'm why is he hunting vermin? And then I go look and he's hungry. And I'm oh no.
Oh, shoot.
And he literally just was going off around the map. And finally he just came back and started killing people because he was so miserable. So yeah. And I don't know. I don't want to speculate on whether he was a cannibal dwarf, but it seems possible.
Well, I mean, it's sort of similar to not similar, but our conversation about in when we played SimCity, and
Yes.
about intent in
Yep.
design choices, right?
Yep.
And the fact that they are choosing to say, and I know I'm not trying to, obviously I'm not stating what I think they're saying, but the fact that they're saying that the failure state is people berserking into murderers,
Yeah.
right? That society breaks down to a point where that is
Right.
what the end game is. That's a statement. I mean,
Yep.
and I just listening to you talk, listening to both of us talk about this. If somebody were to listen to these two episodes and listen to what we're saying about what we're playing, and then look at what the game is,
What it looks like. Yeah, I know.
we just be like,
And how you
what
interact with it. Yeah.
Yeah, what are you talking about? Because it's like it's a bunch of DOS symbols and some just like mystery, and but you like when you're describing to me your methodology, I'm setting up your Dwarf Fortress. It's like I'm nodding. I'm like, yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, oh
I
yeah,
should do
good.
that. Yeah.
And you're like, you just put a O outside of some
Exactly. Yeah.
which is a well outside on some green patches of dots and like black space, which is a mountain. There's not even any art for the mountain. It's just black.
Yep, with occasional like percentage symbols and stuff and periods. Yeah.
It's just
and how do we interact with it? Like we go and we type a key,
press
it pauses
keys.
the game, and then we press star a couple times till we find the thing, so we can press another key, and then we press X to set the corner of that thing, and then press X to set another corner of that rectangle so that we can carve this thing out. It really is remarkable how much it communicates mentally, when there is so little relationship between that and what you're like literally doing, like the things you are actually doing with your hands. It is remarkable. It really is. And I can see why it caught on, like why this has been a thing, and why people wanted to keep it going. Because this is definitely one of those things where this is some large number of people's one game. This is a thing that they could play tons and tons of.
It's labor of love, and just a special sort of like gem. I think it's very telling that they have like a recording movie feature. If you saw that in the
I did, yeah,
and it makes a lot of sense that you'd want to like share this with people, like look what happened kind of stuff. But yeah, just like, and then I'm glad that we stuck with it, because in the first session we were like, I don't know, and then you get over that hump, with lots of games you get over that hump and you're like, oh, okay, I can see where this is going, and you can see a lot of people wouldn't get to that point, right? A lot of people will
I haven't, in the past, I tried it and I was like, wow, it took that long to generate it, and now this, like what do I do? Yeah, I was like, I don't, and I had the time for it. I'm pretty sure I was, in one of my fits of retirement then. So, so I just, I don't. It's really remarkable to me that this thing can do what it does, and how quickly I've gone. I mean, over the course of 2 weeks, and whatever 6 or 7 hours of play or something like that, to like, I'm very curious to push this as far as it can go. Over the next over as far as we can go anyway, over the next couple of weeks. So the next thing we're going to do to kind of put a bow on it and come back to discuss more and hopefully get further with our things next week, is that we're going to go to the most recent Windows release. So the one that came out, I think in December, actually, it was the last pre-Steam release.
Wow. Okay. Pretty recent then.
I think it's that recent. Yes. I think substantially it will feel the same. I'm hoping so. I hope it's not. I hope that some of the things I've learned, right, we're going to translate. I feel like they will, but I hope that they will. And we'll see. And I'm curious to see. I think it's really important to see, since it is one game that continues to evolve, just to see what they chose to evolve. Like, are they going to represent, more more data in sort of an easier to understand way, or are they going to just continue to deepen the simulation? Like, I suspect the latter, but I'm curious, right? I mean, there was a lot of stuff, I think, for expert level SimCity play. For example, we talked about the various graphs of things, and like you can look and see how things are trending, and I wonder
min-maxing of it.
Yeah, exactly. And I wonder if they did any of that, or if they just said, "Nah, you're just gonna manage the the craziness of the simulation." So
yeah, that's a good so I think it's just a wonderful and astounding that they have all the versions on their site, and that we could even go back, and I'm glad you found that, because we can play historically in that way, because not a lot of developers do that. But so just off the cuff here, to your point on like you're wondering what the new version, if you had one thing that you hope that they do that you want, what would it be, if you can think of anything? I have one for myself. I can go first if you want.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll have to think about that, because I do have some thoughts. Yeah, but your thoughts?
My first one that comes to mind is I want to understand better what each dwarves preferences and desires, and like that screen you can go to in the version we're playing, where there's that block of text where it just has a bunch of sentences kind of describing what they want and what they're looking for. That I forget what it's called. I think it's called preferences.
Yeah,
and it gives you information about them. I would like to know more about what that. I mean, some of it's obvious, like they want a well or something,
right?
But just more like a more robust version of that, so I know better how to take care of them, especially on the why they're sad and why they're happy thing.
Right. Yeah, I think for me, I want a little more. I don't want like a tech tree, but I would like to know why I can't brew. Like it'll say you can't, well, you don't have any such and such. Well, I was like, okay, but I don't know how to get those, right? And the game's not helping me. And like I've looked at lots of things on the map, and I don't identify any of those things as that thing you want. Is that just impossible for me? And I just don't. That's a barrier.
To farm it.
It's just a barrier that is not productive for me. It's like as a player, like I just don't. It's just a frustration. It's just like, okay, I have no idea why that doesn't work. And that would be one thing if it was like, some bit of code that I wrote, like, well, this should work. That's okay. That's my job. But that is a thing that I find just like, okay, you could just tell me what it is that, like, maybe you think you are telling me, but it's not. It's too opaque. And I feel like that steepness of those curves is too steep for me. And is I want to know, like, I've got a brewer and I know that they want drink. Like, I would like to know what the path is to that. And I don't want to have to do it in a wiki. Like, I know I could go read that stuff. I'm sure I know this has wikis. Like, but I believe that, for the most part, and I'm kind of two minds, because I do like that there are communities out there who like to support it, and they're trying to make it more presentable to more people, so that they have more people to talk about the game with. I think that's all wonderful. But for me as a player, I like to just experience the game. And and so
it should be self-confined.
For me, that part of it is the thing that I'm missing the most. So like something like the Civipedia or whatever, which gives you a little more information, I'd be fine with, like, if it's just like enough to get sort of the basic stuff going, because that's one of their basic needs. They all want to drink all the time. So it's like, well, I wish I could provide that for them. And that is the one specific thing. The jewel working, like, I kind of got that. It's like, well, we haven't found much jewelry, jewels stuff. I did at one point find some turquoise, I guess, and could cut some turquoise. But then I couldn't really do much with it. But at least made my jeweler happy for a little while. Longer than yours, apparently.
Don't let the jewelers be happy to be sad.
That's right.
Just not go
bad things will happen. You've got to find some sort of job satisfaction for them. So that's really important.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, because you want that sense of discovery too. Once you figure out how to brew, that'll be a like a glorious day, but you don't want it to
Because-
be too bad. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Dark Souls was the thing that convinced me some semi recently about, because I also have never really been much of a wiki slash, looking for solutions kind of person, but I really am glad that I didn't look almost anything up on Dark Souls, that I just kind of let the game be on its own terms, because I really feel like I enjoyed it more because of that. A little bit of help from the stream from time to time, but Artorias became a legend in my own mind because I didn't like go watch videos about him, or something.
Right. Yeah. So I just want some of that. So, all right. Well, let's do a couple of quick emails so we keep pace, because we have some. These are, we still got things that are stretching back a ways. Yours is about Rogue. These are sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. We also, of course, love your reviews, etc. But why don't you go ahead and read that first one from, I think Sam is the one I gave you.
Yeah. Rogue, etc. is the subject from Sam. Hi, guys. Really cool hearing you cover Rogue. You did a great job defining the core elements, especially that in these permadeath games, the key is short runs. I think 30 minutes is the sweet spot, as in Spelunky. The first roguelike I played was NetHack. Once you get over dying in level 1, it is common to have runs that take 10 hours or more.
Yep.
It's just way too long for me to invest and then have to start from scratch. By the way, I think Spelunky and Rogue would have made great arcade games. Yeah, totally. I feel like there might have been a roguelike in an arcade that I'm blanking on. Aside from my complaints about length, this genre lets small indie teams realize incredibly grand visions that we rarely see in AAA games like Dwarf Fortress. Huh. Did Sam send this before?
Yes, he did. Yeah.
Ah, yes. We did it. We time traveled. Hearing you talk about text adventures has made me want to dive back in. I was a Nintendo kid who first played Zork after Final Fantasy, but that didn't stop me from getting completely sucked in. The only problem is that I am terrible at these games and can never finish one without hints. I wanted to recommend some newer games that have light text adventure elements. A Dark Room on iOS invokes the style that doesn't keep you there, but doesn't keep you there the whole time. And Frog Fractions has a wonderful section as well. If you haven't played Frog Fractions, you are missing an incredible experience. Thanks for the weekly reminder that all games rule. Sam.
Indeed. Those are some good recommendations. I have actually seen, the name already went, the one about the dark
Room.
Yeah, the Dark Room.
I think I played that. I gotta look it up.
I did not play much of it, but I did at least check it out when it came out. I remember it got some interest. I was still reading a lot of indie coverage at the time. Yeah, for sure. And what was the other one? I'm terrible.
Frog Fractions.
Frog
is
Fractions,
kind of
yes.
a legend.
Yeah, that's a legend. So the story with me and Frog Fractions is that I was assigned it for the IGF in the year it appeared in the IGF.
Oh wow!
And just randomly, and I'm like, I played it for a while. I'm like, I'm not sure I get this, and of course you're given like half a dozen games or something like that, and there's lots more, right? There's a couple hundred games usually, and I just was like, well, I probably want to cover some other things. Maybe I'll come back to this one, and then it ended up being one that was like one of the most talked about that year in the IGF and like the IGF forums and things like that. And I remember looking at it and going, I'm really not getting something here, like. And I just didn't give it enough time,
You didn't get to the.
I didn't get to the twist. Of course, later I heard about it, and yeah, it's something I've always meant to go back to, but never had. And then when they had finally a Frog Fractions 2, which was out there in the wild for a little while before people discovered that it was Frog Fractions 2. Yeah, it was.
Or was it?
Yeah, or yeah, was it? Maybe it was Frog Fractions 3. Maybe there's another 2 that they didn't that nobody's discovered yet. You never know with those guys. Yeah. Anyway, it's one that I definitely feel like I should go back to, and it's it's supposed to be pretty great and pretty all encompassing in some way. So Someday, and thanks for the reminder, Sam. I have one here from Zachary Crownover. If that is your real name, the subject is a text gag. You may remember I mentioned the text gags in Plundered Hearts. He says, "Hi, Brett and Tim. Normally I wouldn't write about a game you're not currently playing, but after Brett's tangent on text gags, I'd be remiss to not bring up what is to this day my favorite gag, text or otherwise, in any video game. And given that it's a sequel to a game you've already played on the cast, I doubt I'm spoiling anything for a future episode. The gag in question is in 2000's Thief 2: The Metal Age. In one of Thief 2's levels, you have the opportunity to find a secret room containing nefarious-looking sigils on the ground. And it's here the gag takes place. Now, a principal mechanic of the Thief games is interacting with documents scattered around the world. Most of these give the player information about the world, like where to find certain valuables, NPCs, etc. But in this particular room, a document placed prominently in the space's focal point instead contains a number of lines written in a fictional language. You'll likely look at these over for a moment, be determining they're just flavor text, and closing the document. But as you do so and turn around to exit, you'll find that a number of zombies have appeared amidst the sigils gracing the room's floor. The implication, of course, is that Garrett, like the player, has just read what was apparently a necromantic incantation, inadvertently summoning several hostile NPCs in the process. I can honestly say that few moments in games have elicited as much genuine laughter from me as this one. It remains, in my opinion, one of the best examples of taking a well-worn mechanic, simply reading a document, and doing with it something utterly novel and delightful. Thanks again for the podcast, and here's to thinking outside the text. Cheers, Zachary Crownover." Yes, I agree. I remember that moment actually in a Metal Age, which I did play. And yeah, we probably won't play for the cast, having played Thief. And it's a good one. It's a great moment. You turn around there. Oh.
Don't read the demonic text, even if you're not sure what it says.
Yeah. It's definitely. I feel like the history there is carried forward. I think there's some really good stuff hidden in the text in Dishonored 1 or 2. There's something in a hidden room where if you like, I mean, it doesn't. I don't think it changes anything about. It doesn't summon anything or anything like that. But there's details about the world that is actually pretty rich in sort of like stuff that's hidden in rooms like that you can read that really kind of deepen that story, but also feel like they almost feel Easter eggy because they feel like they reveal stuff about the story that's coming, or even there was some meta thing in one of them, I think, as well. I'm not remembering this well because it's been a number of years. And so
subversive kind of text that feels like there's layers to it. I mean, I would, obviously it's a drinking game at this point, but when I talking about Prey, the without spoiling the ending, I will say some of the text you read, right? Like they can really lean into the subversion there because of what is actually happening in that game. Yes. So I'll leave it at that for those who haven't. I don't. That's one of the few games that I will never want to spoil for anybody, even if it's 10 years from now, because I'm a big fan, as we know.
As we know, one of these days I got to play that Moon Crash too, man.
Yeah,
too many games,
actually.
Man. There are too many games. All right, well, yeah, I got to stop playing Rogue Legacy 2 is the problem. Well, thank you for those 2 emails. We're just going to read it too. We need to keep it quick and tight this week, so we really appreciate all of those, and we will get to the ones we still have in the future. Those, of course, sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. And of course, we'd love to get your reviews on the iOS platform or wherever you get your podcasts. Just shoot us a line if we don't read it in a timely manner, and we will hunt them down. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
Somewhat infrequently, I imagine now, but you can also find him twitching. He's returning to that maybe next week at twitch.tv/Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end, where you're going to be going back to Dark Souls 2. Is that correct?
Yeah, I probably will for the next couple of weeks, but I do want to actually get back to finishing some of the games I haven't finished. So I'm thinking about going back to Dead Space because it'll be an easy one to do. But yeah.
Cool. You can also join us on our Discord. You can go to the Twitter feed, and if there's not a good one recently, I can send a new link. I'm not good at that part. I'm sorry. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Evers, and our logo, our store, and our Discord, although that is supported by many others, is by Mark Garcia. Have fun flooding what was the future home of generations of dwarves this week, and good night.
Good night.